Japan Station is made possible in part by Patreon support. If you would like to make sure that I can keep bringing you more content like this, then head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon and sign up for as little as $1 a month. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. I've got a lot to say, but I will do my best to keep this very brief because there's a lot of backstory to this episode. And also just the person that I'm talking to is incredibly, incredibly talented. I want to, just talk about him and all the amazing stuff that he does. So first of all, his name is David Nakayama, and David is an amazing artist who has done work for video games and Hasbro. And of course, I think he is most well known for his just beautiful, incredible covers for Marvel Comics. He's done work for Spider-Man and Deadpool and Captain America, and he also was one of the people behind the relaunch of Big Hero 6 in 2008. So Big Hero 6 was a series that was launched some years earlier, I think in the 90s, but then it never really caught on. It kind of died out, and then they brought it back in 2008. And then some of the stuff that he helped create in 2008 ended up influencing the movie that would come out a few years later. And he was credited in the movie because of his role in the 2008 relaunch, which he worked on with Chris Claremont. If you like Marvel Comics, you know who Chris Claremont is. He had just a legendary run on the X-Men back in the 90s, I think, when I was collecting comics. I'm sure I had quite a few Chris Claremont comics in my collection, which I still have in my closet. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So David has quite the resume. Now, why am I talking to David? Well, first of all, he has this connection to Japan via Big Hero 6, which is a team of superheroes highly influenced by Japan. He really drew a lot of influence from anime and manga for that comic. We're going to talk about that today. But also, he's a big fan of anime, manga, and video games from Japan. Super Mario Bros. 3, Mega Man. We're going to talk about that kind of stuff too. But also, we're going to talk about his career. Now, why did I end up talking to David? Well, the thing is that I was working as the editor-in-chief of Wasabi magazine at the time here in Hawaii. Wasabi was a magazine. It's kind of on an indefinite hiatus right now. We don't know if it will come back or not, but Wasabi was this really, really cool magazine. I absolutely loved working on it. And it focused on Japan and Hawaii and Japanese food and some pop culture stuff. And one of the things that we really, really, really liked to do was interview artists from Hawaii and showcase their work on the cover. And then I would write a big article about them, or somebody else would write an article about them. And that was what I was going to do with David Nakayama. I already did this with Stan Sakai, for example, right? Stan Sakai, creator of Usagi Yojimbo. You can listen to the interview that I did with him a few years ago, probably like 3 years ago at this point, or maybe even 4. I don't even remember, but the episode is here on Japan Station. You can go listen to that. So the idea was to interview David, which I did. You're going to listen to that. And then we would have him do a cover for us. And we were kind of talking, maybe we were going to have a Marvel character on there, maybe a Spider-Man or something. It seemed like it was going to work out, but then the pandemic happened. Okay. So this was, like 2.5 years ago. And then Wasabi went on this indefinite hiatus, and I was never able to write the article. And I had this interview just sitting here. I wanted to release it. And since we know that Wasabi is probably not going to be coming back anytime soon, if it does, then I decided, you know what, I'm just going to release this episode. I got the okay. And there it is. Now I can finally share this conversation with you. So the first part of the conversation is going to be a little bit about Big Hero 6, some Japanese influences, some anime, some video games. And then in the latter half of the conversation, we get into, his origins as an artist and just his career and some of the amazing stuff that he's done, his philosophy as an artist. So, as you're going to hear, this was really for like an interview article, something that I was going to write. So I really wanted to get into like his personal story, and get into all the little details. So you are going to get some Japan stuff in the beginning, and then we're going to kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent and go into some global trends, some American comic stuff, which I find fascinating. Hopefully you do too. David is just such an incredibly talented guy. You can find his stuff over at davidnakayama.com. You can find him on Instagram. He's got almost 100,000 followers. I think that speaks a lot to just the caliber of his work and just his status in the industry. So I'm just so honored that I got to talk to him, and I got him to sign some comics for me that he did. I bought some comics before I went to his house here in Hawaii, and I got Big Hero 6 #1 from 2008. Still have that in my collection in my closet. Very proud to have an autographed copy of that from David, the artist that helped relaunch Big Hero 6. So anyway, here we go. Here's my conversation with David Nakayama.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
Thank you for having me at your house, David.
You're so welcome. Thank you guys for coming out. This is neat.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and it's super quiet, which is wonderful.
Yes, this is much better than that Starbucks idea we could have gone with.
So, I want to start by talking about Big Hero 6.
Okay, yes.
Now, so for anybody that's unaware, you did the designs for the 2008 it was like a relaunch, basically,
that's right?
Yeah, I think it still keeps the continuity of the original one that came out in the late 90s, but you kind of update the design and introduce a couple new characters.
That's true. So, Of course, everyone knows Big Hero 6 now, that it's a major Disney film and a continuing cartoon on Disney Plus, I guess, now. But before that, it was a Marvel comic. And I came in after the characters had been introduced, but they'd sort of lied fallow for a while. You know, they hadn't had a series in a little while, so we needed a reboot. And that included Chris Claremont coming on as a writer. You know, the legendary X-Men writer Chris Claremont was on board. It introduced 2 new characters, which we co-created. That'd be Fred and Wasabi. And we also took the time to visually redesign the entire team. So, and for good reason, I would say. When Baymax first premiered, this is one of the main characters in Big Hero 6, the robot. He looked like kind of a reptile, all green, organic, did not look like a robot, and yet was a robot. And I'm thinking to myself, if I'm going to redesign this guy, I think he should look like a robot.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, in the way that the Japanese people think of a robot, because every character in Big Hero 6 is a Japanese person from Japan.
Right.
So when I redesigned Baymax, it was important that it looked like a technological being who was a robot. And that's why you got that design. In the Disney movie, they stuck with that. Especially his armored form is reminiscent of what I did. They invented also the blow up pillow thing, which was
the cute one,
a funny way to go, and I enjoyed that, of course. But I was glad that they stuck with him being a robot.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah, and he looks kind of, I guess for anybody that hasn't seen the 2008 version, kind of Gundam-y, I guess you might say.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking to myself, if your hero, the main character, the boy who's the central character in the series, how are you going to invent this thing? What's that going to look like to you? This is a boy who grew up with Gundam and Evangelion and whatever it was. And so I was definitely thinking about that fandom when I was designing it.
So speaking of Hero, now as I was mentioning earlier, in the back of issue #1 of the 2008 Big Hero 6, you put in a bunch of pages explaining the covers,
isn't that neat?
The character designs.
Right.
I love that because that's the kind of stuff that I like to mine to like later for questions.
Sure. Yeah.
And you mentioned, if I remember correctly, so Hero had a few features such as he has a baseball cap of the Yomiuri Giants, right? Baseball cap. And then also his hairstyle you took from, or based it on, Samurai Champloo Mugen, right?
Absolutely.
The kind of breakdancing samurai rebel character, right?
Yeah.
So I guess you watched Samurai Champloo. You must have enjoyed the show.
I liked it. Yes, very much.
So just going off on a little tangent for a second. So I guess you like anime?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a little bit behind. I'm still catching up on big hits that people have been seeing a million years ago. Like I'm only just now finishing Kill la Kill, for example.
Oh man, yeah.
So I'm a little bit behind schedule. I haven't yet seen My Hero Academia or any of that stuff, but I'm catching up slowly, and I do enjoy it.
So when did you get into? Was it like in the 90s or
in anime?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I went to Punahou High School, and they had an anime club.
Oh.
And this is in the early 90s or something. And I'm like, what is this? I don't know what this is. I'm, vaguely interested in cartoons and comics and stuff like that. And I just walked into this thing without knowing what on earth it was. And they were playing Record of Lodos War, which is basically, for people who don't know, it's like Dungeons and Dragons filtered through anime.
Right.
And it was completely up my alley. I loved everything about it. It was so mysterious and amazing to me. I was like instantly hooked, but yet not understanding what I was seeing. So over time, being in this club, I got exposed to a few more things and realized that I like this stuff, right? By the time I got to college, I was also still trying to seek out the anime club and be exposed to more things. And I was a regular there in college, and we were watching things at the time like Evangelion and Rurouni Kenshin and Magic Knight Rayearth and other stuff. There were many. That was when I was up to date. and over time, I've slowly had less and less time.
Oh, it's tough. It's tough. And there's just so much. I think more stuff coming out than ever before.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of good stuff too. So it's just,
so much. Yeah. It's tough. So I try to pick and choose, and there's lots of modern stuff that's fun. Like One Punch Man has been fun. I love that. I can never remember, is it Attack or Assault on Titan? But that's
Attack is the English translation.
There you go.
Attack on Titan. Yeah.
Like that. Anyway, and Castlevania, isn't technically an anime, but scratches that itch.
Yeah. I heard that it was really good.
It is really good. It's in fact, it's the only video game adaptation that I think is worth your time. Period.
Really?
Period. Yeah. Like, can you think of another animation or movie that is actually good?
No.
I would say no.
Yeah.
But Castlevania, written by Warren Ellis, like one of the best comic writers ever, is actually really good.
Huh.
I would say because of his writing.
Cool. Did you grow up playing video games?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
Old Nintendo.
Since 8-bit Nintendo, have been pretty into video games, yeah.
Cool.
In fact, I'll share a funny
please.
Hawaii story if you like.
I love that, yeah.
All right, so when I was like 10, Oceanic Cable had a contest where they were giving away Super Mario 3, to totally date myself.
Yeah.
And to enter the contest, you had to just draw your favorite video game character on this like paper that they gave you, and then you sent it in. You have a chance to win.
Yeah.
I was all about this thing, and I made an entry for every single video game I had, something like 13 entries. I was sending them in every chance I get. There's probably no kid on the island that was more into this contest than I was. And then I forgot all about it. And then sure enough, one day Super Mario 3 shows up in my mail.
My God, yeah.
I couldn't believe it. It was like the best thing that had ever happened to me. Felt like Christmas.
Yeah.
It also reaffirmed like me wanting to do art. I'm like, hey, art has a positive effect for me.
That's awesome.
So yeah. Thank you, Oceanic Cable.
Today, I think they're Spectrum today, right?
Spectrum now,
they turned into Spectrum.
That's right.
Yeah. That makes me think of what's that Fred Savage movie, the Wizard or something?
Yeah, that's right. The Nintendo one. Yeah, that was called The Wizard.
He plays Mario 3. Like it's basically a big commercial for
Mario 3. I know. Yeah. No, I felt like I was a cool kid because I had it. Otherwise, it would have been unaffordable to me. I didn't have the money to buy it on my own.
Yeah. So in the 2008 Big Hero 6 series, like if you look at the art, it does have a certain like anime vibe to it.
Right.
Was that your idea? Was that you talking with Chris? Did you guys agree on that, or where did that come from?
This is all my idea. The amazing thing, the weird thing about it is that when we did this relaunch, they almost let me approach it like a showrunner. Like they gave me so much creative freedom and like seemed to be asking me what I thought we should do. And I don't know why that was. I have a Japanese last name, but I had never drawn in a Japanese style before or shown any other reason to think that I was necessarily a great candidate or whatever, but I took it really seriously. And I said, okay, if this is the comic that is about characters from Japan, how can we make it the most Japanese thing Marvel publishes? You know, so I like we talked about the redesigns already. I thought it was important to really commit, you know, like if I'm going to do this right, I should make this look as Japanese as I can make it. And I did my best, you know, like some pages are better than others. I think the first few issues are pretty good. You know, I'm definitely looking really closely at that sunrise style and other things as I was doing it, but I was kind of learning how to do it as I did it. So I never said this is manga. I never said this is like official or whatever. I always said this is a hybrid between what I draw and manga, and I'm just making it as Japanese as I can.
Yeah. I noticed because I got issue number 1 specifically so I could take a look at it. Yeah. And I saw, for example, like the chins are kind of angular.
Super pointy, yeah.
Right, yeah. And the hair, of course, you know, especially Hiro, you know, he has the very anime hair.
Yep.
But then the nose is very like an American comic. Bit, like it has a little bit more detail to it rather than just like the one tiny line. You can kind of see the nostril sort of like shape to it. So it's like really like a hybrid. The eyes are kind of like an in-between. Yeah. Not quite fully anime, but, you know, has like a little American.
I thought the eyes were pretty close. They were to me. I found I did a lot of research. I looked at, you know, the Evangelion and the Samurai Champloo stuff and many others, and was just kind of figuring, you know, eyes are drawn in thousands of different ways, even within anime, and I was trying to pick ones that I felt good about. And at the time, FLCL was coming out, and so you had this shift even within anime toward more Western approaches. Like if you recall, the characters had full lips in FLCL, which was really unusual and still is pretty unusual in anime. And so I took that as, you know, okay, I can do anime or manga style and yet have some Western influences, just like they're doing in Japan. Yeah. So I felt like it was as close as I could get it.
Definitely, yeah. And I think more and more nowadays, you're starting to see like Western stuff with more of an anime flair to it.
It's back and forth, right? Now that we have the global internet, there, you know, people in comics in the West are being heavily influenced by the East and vice versa. And so what I see in comics now is there was this amazing trend in South Korea in particular, but Asia in general, of just like the most beautiful digital painting you've ever seen. And so this weird thing happened in comics where comics had been this sort of closed box society for decades, where all the art was almost like this sort of traditional Western pen and ink line art style where the labor was divided between a penciler, an inker, and a colorist. And it's been that way for decades and decades, right? And very rarely did you have any kind of painted art or digital art or anything. Then the internet happened. And then all of a sudden, these artists, in particular, I would say out of Asia, who had been, you know, learning how to paint in the computer for video games or whatever, suddenly they're a phone call away. And so if you're Marvel Comics, you can go to these guys and go, how about some covers? And suddenly you have this superstar and this superstar and this superstar. And it went like overnight from this Western style to anything goes. And sure enough, like the readers of comics had never seen this kind of painted stuff before. And they're like, their heads are whipping back with like the quality, right? It's so much more engaging and higher end than maybe what they were used to. And so right now I think the market is catching up to, you know, they're getting used to what is possible in art and accepting new forms such as Asian style stuff, such as digital painting. And those of us who are artists in the market trying to, you know, compete in this marketplace are absorbing influences from all over. So it just feels like this chaotic whirlwind of creativity that is global that you're seeing play out on the covers of Western comics right now. Yeah.
And I think like 20 or 30 years ago, the divide between like anime fans are anime fans, American comic fans are American comic fans, and there is no overlap. Yeah. It's not so harsh anymore, right? There's a lot more overlap these days.
I'd say the edges are blurring.
Yeah.
So you got guys like Art Germ, you know, is a very popular cover artist right now out of Singapore. And there's no way you would confuse his style for a Western approach. But yet he is one of the most popular cover artists there is right now. So that shows that Western audiences are definitely willing to accept that sort of thing. And yet in the actual pages of the comics, not so much. Still pretty Western for some reason.
Yeah. And the cover is kind of the experimentation kind of area, I suppose.
I don't know. It's fascinating to watch. You know, comics Western comics are their own weird little world, and it's a world that I live in, and I'm analyzing all the time and trying to understand, well, okay, if you're a guy like me who has been in the video game industry and I've done a video game in this style and this style and this style, if I can do all these styles, how do I pick how to represent myself in American comics? Like if I could be any of 5 things, which one do I choose?
Right.
And that's why the analysis, right? Like I'm looking at who's popular, why, how can I be part of this obvious trend?
Right. So back to Big Hero 6. You said earlier before we were recording, but you threw in a couple little Hawaii things in there.
Right.
Could you tell me?
Oh boy, well, it's been years at this point. But
I remember the character Wasabi, you mentioned like in his clothes, you kind of threw in like a little aloha shirt kind of thing.
That's true. He did. Now that you mentioned it, I remember that. At the time, there was an article in the paper about Big Hero 6, and that's exactly what we were talking about, is like what are the little Hawaii things you snuck in there. And there was certainly like a little Daruma, good luck character in the first couple of pages it didn't say to do that in the script. It was just a thing that I added that I thought was fun. And like you mentioned, Wasabi is originally wearing an aloha shirt. They really changed him in the movie. He does not do any of that stuff. He's a sushi chef in the comic. And I don't believe he does that at all in the movie.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think he's a tech guy, like student, right?
It's as if like the longer the characters had been around in Marvel Comics, the less that Disney monkeyed with them. So, by the time Disney got a hold of it, Hero and Baymax had been in a good 20, 25 comics or something like that. But Wasabi and Fred had only been in the 5 issues that we made.
True.
So I think they felt like they had a little more license to add their own thing.
Yeah, less people would complain too. So, you try to mess with like a 40-year-old character, there's a lot of people say, no, yeah.
And that's the other funny thing is like our comic was just a tiny under the radar book. And when it ended, that was it. I don't believe it had enough sales even to warrant a collected edition at the time. So I was leaving Comics for Games at the same time. Temporarily, I'm back. But I was leaving at the time, and I kind of was sad. It did not pay off the way that I had hoped.
Right.
We invested a lot in it, and I was really high on the prospect of this collaboration with Chris Claremont and my first real Marvel book proper in the Marvel universe canonically and whatever. And it didn't happen the way I wanted. So then years go by, the movie comes out, and I had gone from thinking this was a project that did nothing and wasn't valuable to people, and then it just completely flipped over. Yeah. And now Big Hero 6 is possibly the thing I might be best known for. So
it's funny, right?
It's very strange. Like I did not think that would be the case, but that's the art gods in action there.
You keep at it, eventually you never know what's going to pop, right?
You never know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and just to let people know, you do get a credit in the credits of the movie, right?
Yeah. I do. And to date, that is my only movie credit. And I only got it, I understand, because the Big Hero 6 original creators, Man of Action, the team that originally created them, they make cartoons for Disney now, like Ben 10 and stuff. So they that was all because of them. They fought for their credit, and they said that everyone who created or co-created a character in the Big Hero 6 world who appears in this film should get that credit.
Oh, that's awesome.
So if they hadn't fought for it, I don't think my name would be there. And so I give them credit for getting me that on-screen,
that's
shout
cool.
out.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back a bit. You already kind of, it seems like you were drawing, stuff for the video game thing, so you were drawing from an early age here in Hawaii. Do you remember, like, was there a moment where you go like, oh, I want to be in comics, I want to draw for a job, like something like that? When did you start thinking that?
Yeah, I remember very specifically. I was sitting in like my 5th grade classroom or something like that, just drawing for fun. I think I had a friend across the table who also drew for fun, and we were like drawing Garfield or something at the time. And I was just thinking to myself, or I started drawing Mega Man because it was a game I was playing at the time, and at this time, all games were coming out of Japan, every single one. Like there was no obvious American publisher or creator of games. And So I'm sitting there drawing Mega Man levels and just realizing, well, this is really awesome, but wow, what do I do? Like, how do I take this further? Who would I talk to? And it just felt like such a dead end. And so I guess what it was is like my brain was looking for some place to invest in artistically. I knew I wanted to do art. And I couldn't figure out where I should put it. Should it be like Garfield in these newspaper, comic strips? Should it be comic books? Could it be video games? At the time, it felt like, no, it couldn't be video games because those things are made in Japan.
Right.
And I maybe was outgrowing Garfield at the time. So I think that's how I ended up really starting to pay attention to comic books. And at the same time, in the early 90s, comic books were getting really hot. You might remember, but there was
that's when I was getting into it.
Absolutely. When Image Comics, was happening, and X-Men #1 to date, that's the top selling comic of all time. And it's because literally every male in America, who was a teenager up to their 20s at the time was definitely buying comics. And so it just happened that it made a lot of sense for me to artistically invest in comics at the time. I definitely don't mean financially invest in them. I didn't care about that at all. I cared about the art and the stories I started getting into later, but the art in particular, and Jim Lee in particular, is what got me into comics. And from then on, I think my heart was really sold on comics.
Do you remember where you bought your first comic or discovered the you do?
Oh,
okay, where was that? I'd love to.
How could I
it's a
forget?
Hawaii thing.
Yes. Let's go deep.
Yeah.
Those of you who remember Jellies across from Ala Moana, that's where it was.
I've never been there, but I've heard of it. I've talked to other artists. Jellies. I've heard the name before. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So it was a sort of Jellies when they were there, and then Gecko Books and Kaimuki for a long time. Like, I remember my dad taking me to get Superman 75, which was this key issue where Superman dies. And
I remember
it was
that.
a huge deal for a lot of people, and it was hard to get. And, so I remember going there to get that with him. And later on, Jellies moved to Puck's Alley by University. And I remember Stan Lee himself came to sign at the store.
Wow.
And my brother and I had found under the house this stash of my dad's old comics that my grandma had kept somehow, like a whole treasure trove of ancient comics, like from the 60s and stuff.
Wow.
And in among them was Uncanny X-Men #2.
Wow.
Like in terrible shape, but it was treasure to us, it was Uncanny #2. So when we saw Stan, we put this ratty old copy of Uncanny #2 in front of him, and he goes, "Wow, that's something you don't see every day." I'm like, I'll never forget this. So that's my Stan story.
Oh, that's awesome. How old were you when you did that?
I must have been 14 or so, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Okay, so Punahou, it seems you got into anime, or you were in the anime club but you were also into comics, and I guess you were probably still playing games too. So then it comes time for college, and you think, all right, I'm gonna go into art, I'm gonna go into comics.
Right.
Is that the plan?
Yeah, but it's a hard plan to pull off because you can't search out the comic book major. There was this thing called the Joe Kubert School, which I eventually went to many years later. But at the time, I'm not sure with my own skills or what I want to do. I have this one voice in my head. Hey, you should do this thing that you're passionate about. Go be an artist. But I have another voice in my head saying that's really not financially safe, and everyone in my family's a doctor. Maybe you should do that. So I found this school called Washington University in St. Louis that has one of the best med schools in the country, but also has a full art school.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was my weird criteria for getting in there. There are lots of colleges that have art programs, but they're just programs. They're not a full-fledged art school where you can go and major fully in art. So that was a distinction for me and a reason I really liked WashU, and I ended up going there for that reason. And so I spent the first couple of years kind of going back and forth, kind of doing both. I was doing art classes. I was getting prereqs for medicine. And then I hit this macroeconomics course and just bombed out of it. It was impossible for me. I could not get my head around it. It was the first time in my life where I was failing tests. And I was like, okay, well, I think this is a sign. This is like, here it is. Here's the wall. I cannot go further on this track, or at least I felt that way at the time. And I think at that point, I rededicated myself toward art and got really serious about art, really flipped a switch in my brain. Now it's time to really, if I'm going to do it, I have to do art.
Yeah. So then did you finish your studies there and then go to the Kubert school? How did that work?
Well, what happened is in the art school that they had there, they still, even though it was a dedicated art school, they didn't have a comic thing. They had something called visual communications, which was 1/3 illustration, 1/3 graphic design, and 1/3 advertising. And all of those classes eventually turned out to be useful for me. I do find that I use all those skills now. But the fact of the matter was I graduated with not enough skill in any particular thing to get professional work. There weren't classes for comics, so I didn't really have a lot of comic pages. So there was no good portfolio to show around. My human figure drawing was not at the level where I could get work. I ended up having to major in comic strips because my faculty did not believe in comic books, and just to get through the major, I had to compromise and do the next best thing. So I tried really hard for a while to do the comic strip thing, and it just wasn't, at the time, this is by the time the internet had come along already, newspapers are already starting to dry up. Comic strips as a medium is becoming less of a thing. So it was just like the worst possible timing to pursue something like that. So I wasn't ready for comics, didn't have the right skills, decided I needed to go for more school, ended up at the Kubert School for 2 more years because of that.
And the Kubert, where is that?
It's in a little town called Dover in New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
And so I lived there for 2 years. It's a 3-year program, but at the end of the second year, I was starting to get nibbles for professional work.
Right. And
I didn't want to leave without getting permission from Joe Kubert himself, who was alive at the time and running the school, and he's this legendary comic book creator. And I asked for a meeting with him, and I said, Joe, look, I respect you very much, and I have these offers coming in, but unless you give me permission, if you feel like I am ready to do this, I'm not going to do it. And he gave me permission. It was what I needed to hear. He had the financial incentive to say, no, you're not ready. Come back and pay us for a 3rd year.
Yeah.
But the fact that he would say, you're fine, you're good enough, go ahead, that meant everything to me. And I felt the confidence to go take that jump.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I think it was a Star Wars comic that you first.
You've done your research, yeah.
Yeah. And I heard a story that you basically just got an email out of the blue while you were still at school.
That's right. Yeah.
So, but how did they find out about you?
I have no idea. I mean, it had to have been DeviantArt or something like that, which was like one of the main social media for art at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
And otherwise, I don't know. I'm really not sure. I had been sending packets around. Maybe if someone finally looked at one of those, but it felt out of the blue.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Top Cow and Aspen Comics were sending emails about, hey, do you want to be an intern? So I'm thinking, there's some stuff happening here. Like maybe I'm good enough to make a go of it. And it took many more years to finally, get Marvel work or be good enough for any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I still look back on that stuff and it's pretty embarrassing to me, but I think every artist feels that way.
That's anybody that does any kind of creative thing, it always feels like that, I think. So nowadays you're very well known for, of course, your covers, especially like the variant covers that you do. Those are, I'm sure collectors especially, they just, they know who you are. But it seems like you started out with like penciling and the artwork like inside, right?
That's true.
So
yeah.
Okay. So first of all, could you give me an idea? So what exactly is penciling? And then like, how did you change? How did you make that shift into, it seems like you're focusing more on covers now.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I was describing it before, but the traditional way that American comics were made for speed was they would divide the labor between a penciler who would sort of roughly sketch in everything that happens on the page. So it's all the storytelling decisions and the costuming and the lighting are established in the pencils. But then another artist called an inker would come in and draw it in crisp black lines. And that saves time because 2 artists are collaborating on the same pages, right? And then on top of it, there'd be a 3rd artist that would go in color. And so the reason that format happened was for speed, but also for the technology of printing at the time required the art to be very crisp and easy to reproduce.
Right. And like very visible on the newsprint, I guess.
I guess maybe that was part of it, right?
Yeah.
Like you could, there was a thought that you couldn't have like painted art, I guess, because it wouldn't reproduce cleanly on newsprint or something like that. But anyway, that's how it was. So if you were a comic artist or a wannabe comic artist at the time, you were in that mold. You were going to be a penciler, or you're going to be inker, or a colorist. So I wanted to be the main guy. I wanted to be the penciler, like all my heroes, right? So I learned how to do that. But what happened to me is after a year or two doing that, I kept having the same situation happen where the pencils would be passed to an inker, and the inker would put their own artistic spin on things, and that would really bum me out because decisions I had made were being countermanded, and I wouldn't be happy with the final result. And then further, when the colorist would get a hold of it, it's a total luck whether you have a good one or a bad one. And I kept finding that I was disappointed with that as well. So I'd be happy with the pencils. It would lose 20% of its value in the inks, lose another 20% in the colors. And by the time it came out, it would not even feel like my own work anymore. And I hated that. And I hated the fact that I had spent a full month of my life drawing each issue, and then it would come out and bum me out.
Yeah.
So at some point, I realized that I was never going to work, and I would have to do things myself if I was ever going to be happy with it. But I filed that away in my head and kind of went off to video games. And only later, when I came back as a cover artist, many years later, did I have that chance to finally do everything myself. I also, by the way, didn't have the skills to do it by myself as a comic penciler. I had never colored without watercolors in my whole life. So it actually took that weird detour through video games, years of, crash coursing myself through this, and, smarter people than I teaching me how to use Photoshop. Somehow I acquired those coloring skills and was actually in a position to do the whole artwork myself when it came time to do those covers.
So what do you remember, like how the first, I guess, so you go to video games and then you come back. How did you get into the covers? Did somebody say like, hey, why don't you try covers? Did you start trying to sell yourself? It's like, hey, I really want to do a cover. You should give me a chance.
It wasn't offered. It was definitely something I had to seek out. So I had worked for a couple of wonderful editors, Mark Paniccia, who first invited me to Marvel on Marvel Adventures Hulk years before, but also his assistant editor at the time, Jordan White. Those two editors I owe them everything. I think I wouldn't be at Marvel without those guys. And so Jordan, I think, was the primary editor on Big Hero, and I very, very reluctantly left comics to go pursue games just because we were starting a family, and it was just way more money. It just made a lot of sense for our family to do that. And, back to Mega Man, right? I was still in the back of my head, really wanted to do that video game thing. So those are the reasons I went and did it. I was doing that for a few years, but after, I want to say about 5 years, I started feeling like not creatively fulfilled. So I started writing Jordan again. And I said, hey man, here's the art I've been doing in video games. Like, any chance I can come back for covers? And I worked on him for a little while, and finally he took pity on me, I think, and invited me to come back for what would be my first cover art in a long time, which was a series called Long Shot Saves the Marvel Universe.
Okay.
And I think the covers still hold up. They're still pretty good.
I haven't seen it. I will look it up. I'm curious.
Yeah, and some Deadpool stuff at the time. And I've basically been doing cover art here and there ever since. And by the way, Jordan went on to fame as the Star Wars editor when Marvel took over Star Wars. And now he's running the blockbuster relaunch of the X-Men books right now. So every once in a while I get to work with him still, and would like to more.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, so I think looking at your covers, you can tell like you really love to like go into detail and just really flesh out the artwork. It seems just when I saw your hours, I was blown away.
Oh, good.
I was watching a video that you did where you were drawing Captain Marvel, just live, and you were explaining your process.
Yeah.
And you explain, you say that, I believe you tell your daughters, right, that drawing is like a magic trick,
yes,
or something like that.
That's right.
Could you explain
Elaborate
that?
on that?
I thought that was such a wonderful quote.
Thank you.
And seeing the process of you starting, from nothing and then ending up with, this reproduction or this amazing rendition
Yes.
of the movie Captain Marvel, and explaining all the little details. I loved it. So,
I would love to. And you've just solved my problem about what to put on that board over there.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah. So there's a little signature
That's the one
thing that we're
thing
going
I
to do.
say that I didn't steal from somebody else.
That's true. There you go. Problem solved.
Excellent. Okay, so to me, art is a magic trick because you start off with this blank piece of white paper, and then you put some lines on it, and suddenly there's a thing there that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can make someone believe that there is a living character, that literally wasn't there a second ago. Just through the artist's ability, you have created a character or told a story or all of the above, made someone feel something. That's amazing and is a magic trick. So that's how I describe it in that video and basically to anyone who will listen.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. No, it's great. You, like you said, blank page, and then you end up with like this person there and you go like, oh, and you feel things, right?
Right.
You feel things like there's like dynamism. It feels like the person might be doing something, might be feeling something.
Totally.
And these emotions come across.
I've a couple of times given a panel discussion about cover art. And one thing that always comes up is like, how do you make a compelling cover? And there are many, many ways to do it. It's, it's about leading the eye and it's about draftsmanship and it's about other things, but the emotion is really important. So if you can make someone laugh or if you can create a sense of dread or whatever it is, if that's not there, it's going to be a less successful cover. Like everything about a cover contributes to whether someone will like it or not. A cover could be cool and something people would want just because of the human draw, the human figure drawing on it. That might be enough to captivate someone's eye. But I think it's even better if there's, if it made you laugh as well at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other. It seems like to me the best covers do it all.
You've done a few kind of funny covers too. There's the Spider-Man cereal box, which I brought that issue. And there's the Deadpool Captain America one that you did, which is a nice mashup and pretty silly Deadpool stuff on the cover, mixing with super serious Captain America. Any favorite, silly covers or just any cover in general that really sticks out?
I don't think it's an accident that one catches your eye like that. People mention that one all the time. And I don't know, like all my covers, I put time into and I invest in them and they're my babies or whatever, but it really does matter like what the reaction is. Like once I'm done with it, it goes out in the world and then it has a life out there without me where people respond to it. And so that can't help but influence how I feel about the work. And so like that cover you mentioned, so many people have brought it to me at comic conventions to sign and have said nice things about it or reposted to this day. That I can't help but feel like that was, that's going to be a hard one to beat.
Yeah. That's a fun one. It's a fun one. Definitely sticks in the mind. Again, thank you so much, David. I am so sorry it took like 2.5 years to put this episode out, but I am glad it's finally out. I'm sorry I couldn't write an article about it. That was the plan, right? But anyway, I am so happy to at least get to share your story with the world in this way. Go check out davidnakayama.com. Go check him out on Instagram. I was looking there and just more amazing work there. I saw some Star Wars stuff, of course, more Marvel stuff, just beautiful pieces, the kind of stuff that you can have on your wall and just brag about. So go check that out. Link in the show notes. If you have any questions or comments, send them over to mail@japanstationpodcast.com. Don't forget to follow on Facebook and Twitter at Japankyo News. And of course, please follow or subscribe on Apple Podcasts or whatever your podcast platform is. That is the number one thing you can do to support the show. That is free. You can also support the show by shopping on Amazon via the affiliate link, japankyo.com/Amazon. Thank you so much for listening. That does it for this episode. Oh, thank you to Yunomi for the opening and closing song. Of course, go check out the latest episode of Ichimon Japan. That one is about the World War II katakana word quote-unquote ban. Really, really interesting stuff. Go check it out. Silly, but also really fun and I think educational. There's some good information there. But anyway, that does it for this episode. Thank you for listening. And remember, go find your miniature pony.
Just do it!